120 faces I'd known for 40 years watched my son-in-law Marcus take my podium. "You're too old now, Gordon." He adjusted his cufflink, platinum, like everything else he wore that wasn't earned. "It's time for fresh leadership." The room held its breath. I stood in the back row where he'd positioned me. I let a smile spread across my face. The same smile I gave subcontractors before I fired them. Reached into my jacket. My hand didn't shake. Pulled out a yellow document dated March 15, 1984. Clause 14C, I said. My wife Helen's handwriting. Her margin notes. Marcus turned white. "If you're still with me, please subscribe and drop your location in the comments. It means everything." My name is Gordon Sinclair. I was 22 years old in 1984 when I started Sinclair Electric with $800 borrowed from my father, a used Chevy van that burned oil on cold mornings, and a promise to my new bride Helen that I'd build something worth leaving behind. Reagan was president. Interest rates were murder. And I had a toolbox, a high school diploma, and the kind of optimism that comes from not knowing any better. The van cost me $300. I spent another $200 on tools and materials. The remaining $300 went toward the first month's insurance premium, because even back then, I knew you couldn't wire a house without someone eventually blaming you for something. Helen and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on Maple Street. The place smelled like cleaning chemicals and pressed wool. We had a mattress on the floor, a card table, and 2 folding chairs. She worked the front desk at Morrison & Associates, her brother Michael's law firm, typing contracts and filing briefs, while I crawled through attics and basements across 3 counties. Those first 6 months, I averaged 14 hours a day. Weekends didn't exist. I'd come home at 9 o'clock at night, sawdust in my hair and wire insulation under my fingernails, and Helen would have dinner waiting. Meatloaf, pot roast, whatever was on sale at the Piggly Wiggly. She never complained. Not once. The first job I landed was rewiring Mrs. Patterson's kitchen on Oak Street. $62 for 2 days of work. I pulled every wire myself, installed a new breaker panel, and left that kitchen safer than when I found it. Mrs. Patterson recommended me to her sister. Her sister recommended me to her neighbor. Word spread the way it does in small towns, one satisfied customer at a time. By the end of that first year, I had more work than I could handle alone. I hired Tommy Chen, fresh out of trade school, and taught him everything I knew about running wire through old lath and plaster without nicking the insulation. We worked side by side through the winter of 1985, our breath fogging in unheated basements while we ran circuits for new construction and retrofitted old Victorians. Then the lawsuit happened. March of 1987. A subcontractor I'd hired to help with overflow work, a guy named Dennis Rucker, who came with good references and a firm handshake, had wired a junction box wrong in the Hendersons' garage. The insulation melted. The wires arced. The garage caught fire at 2 in the morning while the family slept. Nobody died. That's the only reason I'm not still paying damages. But the garage burned to the foundation, and the Hendersons' minivan was a total loss. The insurance company's letter arrived on a Tuesday. 6 figures. They wanted 6 figures from a 25-year-old with a used van and a mortgage. The lawsuit named Sinclair Electric as the primary defendant. Dennis Rucker had disappeared to Florida. His insurance had lapsed. And suddenly, I was staring down a judgment that would have ended everything before it really started. I remember sitting at the card table in our apartment, Helen across from me. The lawsuit paperwork spread between us like a map of disaster. She brought home coffee from the office. It sat untouched, going cold. "We can mortgage the house," I said. We'd just bought the ranch on Cedar Lane 6 months earlier. 2,200 square feet, 3 bedrooms, a 2-car garage I'd already started converting into a workshop. The down payment had taken every dollar we'd saved. Helen looked at me. She had this way of tilting her head when she was thinking, her dark hair falling across one cheek. And if we lose the lawsuit, then we lose the house anyway. She nodded, didn't argue, didn't cry. What else? I go back to every job Rucker touched. Every single one. I pull his work and redo it myself. Every wire, every junction, every connection. How many jobs? 14. That's 3 months of work. Nights and weekends, on top of my regular jobs. Free of charge. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Then that's what we do. We mortgaged the house. The bank gave us enough to settle with the Henderson's insurance company before the case went to trial. I spent the next 90 days rewiring 14 houses, working until midnight. Most nights, collapsing into bed beside Helen with my muscles screaming and my eyes burning. I kept a log of every job, every wire I pulled, every connection I made, photographed everything, filed the photos in a fireproof cabinet I bought specifically for that purpose. Helen noticed. "You're keeping records," she said one night, watching me label a folder. "I'm never getting caught without documentation again." She smiled. It was a small smile, but it meant everything. "Good. Keep that up." I did. For 40 years I kept that up. Every contract, every invoice, every change order, every inspection report. 4 filing cabinets in my workshop garage, organized by year, cross-referenced by client and project type. Helen called it obsessive. She wasn't wrong. But that obsession saved me once, and I never forgot the lesson. The company grew. Tommy Chen stayed with me for 15 years before starting his own shop in the suburbs. I trained his replacement, and then his replacement's replacement. By 1995, I had 8 employees. By 2005, I had 20. By 2015, I had 30, and we were pulling in $4 million a year in revenue. Helen found a lake house listing once, circled it in red. I looked at the profit-sharing fund instead. She didn't argue. We stayed in the ranch on Cedar Lane. Same kitchen, same bedrooms, same workshop garage where I built ship models in bottles during my off hours. Tweezers steady, glass walls magnifying every mistake. The money went back into the business, into the people. The profit-sharing plan started in 1995. Every employee who stayed more than 2 years got a piece of the annual profits, distributed quarterly. Some years, it was a few $100s. Some years, it was a few thousand. Over time, those checks added up. When old Tom Henderson retired in 2012, his profit-sharing account had grown to $87,000. Last I heard, he was pulling stripers out of the Chesapeake 3 days a week. The Christmas party was always at our house. Helen would spend 3 days cooking. The smell of roasting turkey mixed with cinnamon from the pies cooling on the counter. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, 3 kinds of pie. The employees brought their families. Kids ran through the backyard while their parents talked shop around the fire pit. I'd hand out savings bonds to the children, $50 each, something to start them thinking about the future. These weren't charity events. They were investments. Every dollar I put into my people came back threefold in loyalty, in quality work, in the kind of reputation you can't buy with advertising. Rita Flores started as a bookkeeper in 1997, hired by Helen for her attention to detail. When Rita's husband Carlos died of a heart attack in 1999, she showed up at work the next Monday because she didn't know what else to do. I sent her home with full pay for a month. When she came back, she told me her daughter Maria wanted to be a nurse, but the tuition was impossible. I didn't say anything to Rita, just wrote a check to the nursing school and mailed it directly. Maria graduated 3 years later. She works at County General now, the cardiac unit. The same unit where her father died. When Tom Henderson needed knee surgery in 2008, his insurance covered the operation, but not the recovery time. I kept him on full salary for 6 months while he healed. He tried to thank me. I told him the same thing I told everyone. This is how business works. You take care of people. They take care of you. Tom nodded. He understood. They all understood. Helen handled the paperwork side with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Before we married, she'd worked as a legal secretary at her brother Michael's firm. She knew contracts. She knew provisions. She knew the difference between language that protected you and language that left you exposed. In 1984, when I was still operating out of the van, she drafted the original partnership agreement. Not that I had partners then, but she insisted. Someday you might, she said. Someday you might want to bring someone into the business, or sell part of it, or retire and hand it off. When that day comes, you'll need this. I didn't argue. Helen was always 3 steps ahead of me when it came to paperwork. Her brother Michael, fresh out of law school and working his first real job, helped her draft the document. It was 10 pages long, single-spaced, covering every contingency they could imagine. Paragraph 14, subsection C, was Helen's addition. Michael wanted to skip it. Said it was overkill. No, Helen said. Put it in. The clause required full accounting of all business assets and liabilities, certified by an independent auditor, before any transfer of ownership interest could be legally binding. No handshake deals, no verbal agreements, no shortcuts. Helen wrote a note in the margin of the original document in her careful handwriting. He'll need this someday. I found that note 38 years later, 2 weeks after her funeral, when I was going through the filing cabinets looking for her trust documents. I sat in my workshop garage, holding that yellowed paper, reading her handwriting through tears. She knew. Even then, she knew. I trained 14 journeymen over the decades. Men who started as apprentices, learned the trade under my supervision, and eventually struck out on their own. Every one of them runs a successful shop now. Every one of them still calls me when they have a question or want advice. The Regional Electrical Contractors Association made me president twice. The first time was in 1998. The second was in 2009. Both terms, I pushed for higher safety standards, better training programs, and industry-wide certification requirements. Not everyone liked it. Some of the old-timers thought I was making things too complicated. Gordon, we've been wiring houses for 50 years without all this paperwork, they'd say. And how many of those houses caught fire? That usually ended the argument. My reputation was built on 3 things: quality work, fair pricing, and treating people right. Clients trusted me. Competitors respected me. Inspectors knew that a Sinclair electric job would pass the first time, every time. That reputation took 40 years to build. I didn't know it at the time, but I was going to need every bit of it. My daughter Candace was born in 1988, 4 years after we started the company. She grew up watching me work, trailing me through job sites, handing me tools before she knew their names. She could strip a wire by the time she was 12. By 16, she wanted nothing to do with the business. That was fine. I never pushed her. The shop would be there if she ever changed her mind. She went to college, got a business degree, married a man named Marcus Webb 6 years before Helen got sick. Within 2 years of the wedding, Marcus had inserted himself into the company as director of operations. Candace supported the move. She said it would keep the business in the family. I had my doubts about Marcus from the start. He wore platinum cufflinks to job sites. He talked about synergy and optimization. He'd never pulled a wire in his life, but Candace asked me to give him a chance, and I'd do anything for my daughter. Helen got sick in the spring of 2022. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lasted 8. I nursed her through every day of those 8 months. Hired a night nurse for the first week, then fired her and took over myself. Helen wanted me there. I wanted to be there. Nothing else mattered. I moved a chair next to her hospital bed at home. Slept in that chair for the last 3 months, waking every time she stirred, holding her hand through the worst nights when the pain broke through the morphine. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air. Her hand grew lighter each week. The business ran itself. Rita handled the office. The foreman handled the crews. I checked in by phone once a day, sometimes twice, but my mind was always in that bedroom with Helen. Near the end, she could barely speak. Her voice had faded to a whisper, and even that cost her effort. But she made me lean close one afternoon, her hand gripping mine with what little strength she had left. "Promise me," she said. "Anything. Take care of Candy. Take care of Tommy. Our daughter Candace. Our grandson Thomas. The only family I had left after Helen." "I promise," I said. She died 2 hours later. I was holding her hand when she slipped away. The funeral was on a Thursday. Half the contractors in the region showed up. Rita cried through the whole service. Tom Henderson, on his bad knees, stood at attention like a soldier. I buried Helen's ashes at the lake house we'd finally bought in 2018, scattering them from the dock where we used to watch the sunset together. The lake house was supposed to be our retirement dream. Now it was her final resting place. After the funeral, I couldn't think, couldn't plan, couldn't do much of anything except sit in my workshop and stare at the filing cabinets. I stopped eating regular meals. Sleep came in fragments. My hands, which had never been idle in 40 years, sat folded in my lap for hours at a time. Marcus offered to help. "Let me handle things for a while," he said. "You need time to grieve." I was too tired to argue, too broken to question it. Within weeks, I started noticing changes. The hand-painted sign I'd made in 1984, the one that said Sinclair Electric, Est. 1984, in my own careful lettering, was gone, replaced with something sleek and modern. No founding date. The photo wall in the office. 40 years of completed projects and happy clients and company milestones disappeared next. Marcus said it was dated. Rita mentioned irregular invoices. Vendors I'd never heard of. Payments processed through new software that was more efficient, but harder to audit. I should have paid attention. Should have looked into it. Should have done something. But Helen was gone, and the grief was a weight I couldn't lift. And Marcus seemed so capable, so confident, so willing to carry the burden. The foundation I'd spent 40 years building was still there. The relationships, the documentation, the provisions Helen had insisted on, waiting in those filing cabinets like weapons in an armory. I just didn't know I'd need them yet. But patience wasn't optional in this work. It never had been. You couldn't rush a proper electrical job, and you couldn't rush grief, and you couldn't rush the moment when everything you'd built would either save you or bury you. Helen's margin note sat in that filing cabinet. Her handwriting, her foresight. "He'll need this someday." I touched the filing cabinet, felt the cool metal under my fingers. 40 years of protection. Waiting. She was right. She was always right. Marcus Webb met my daughter at a young professionals mixer when she was 28 years old. Candace was 28 when she came home glowing about a man she'd met at some networking event downtown. Marcus Webb. I should have asked more questions. At the time, Candace told me she'd met someone special. She sounded happy. It had been 2 years since her last relationship ended, and I'd watched her throw herself into work, into exercise, into anything that kept her from sitting still long enough to feel lonely. Helen noticed it too. "She needs someone," Helen said one evening, watching our daughter through the kitchen window as Candace got into her car after Sunday dinner. "She's been alone too long. She'll find someone when she's ready." She's ready. She just doesn't know it. Helen was right. She was always right about people. I should have remembered that later. Marcus hunted Candace. Flowers appeared at her office. Weekend trips materialized. The attention was surgical, calculated. Within 3 months, Candace was bringing him to family dinners. Within 6 months, he'd proposed. I shook his hand the night she told us. His grip was firm but brief. His eyes met mine and then slid away. "Welcome to the family," I said. "Thank you, sir. I promise I'll take care of her." The words sounded right. The delivery was smooth. But there was something in the way he said them, like he was reading from a script he'd practiced. Helen squeezed my arm after they left that night. "He's polished," she said. "You don't like him." I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Just watch him, Gordon. That's all. Watch him." I watched, but not close enough. The wedding was 18 months later, held at the Colvin Community Church, where Helen and I had married, where Candace was baptized, where 3 generations of Sinclairs had marked every milestone that mattered. Pastor Jim Colvin, who had presided over our congregation for 30 years, called me 2 days before the ceremony. "Gordon, I need to talk to you about something." I met him at the church, in his office, with the worn carpet and the smell of old hymnals. Jim was 64 then, with silver hair and the kind of steady voice that carried comfort into hospital rooms and graveside services. "The young man," Jim said, his hands folded on his desk. "Marcus. He came to see me yesterday about the ceremony. Is there a problem? He had some requests." Jim paused. "He wants certain passages removed from the vows." "Which passages?" "Honor thy father and mother." I sat back in my chair. The wood creaked under my weight. He said, "What?" He said it was old-fashioned, implode, that it didn't fit with their vision for the ceremony. Jim's voice was careful. "He was very specific about it, Gordon." He also mentioned the seating arrangements. "What about them?" "He wants you and Helen in the back row." The words hung in the air between us. I thought about my daughter, about her happiness, about the way she'd smiled when she showed me her engagement ring. Did Candace know about this? I don't think so. He came alone. I thanked Jim for telling me. I went home and said nothing to Helen. The wedding was 2 days away. Candace was happier than I'd seen her in years. I sat in the back row. Helen sat beside me, her hand in mine. I watched my daughter marry a man who'd already decided I was an obstacle to remove. I found a video from that day 2 weeks after Helen's funeral, sorting through storage. Someone had left a camera running near the head table. The tape was in a box marked "Wedding." Misk. In the background, barely audible, Marcus is talking to one of his college roommates. 2 years, maybe 3, and the old man will be gone. Then this is all mine. I must have replayed that moment 20 times. The casualness of it. The confidence. Like he was discussing a business acquisition, not my family. By the time Marcus had been director of operations for 3 years, the erosion was complete. Candace had supported the move when he first took the position. She said it would keep the business in the family. He has an MBA, Dad. He knows things we don't. I've been running this company for 35 years. That's exactly my point. Fresh eyes. New perspectives. She paused. Mom would have wanted this. It was the first time anyone had used Helen's name to get something from me. It wouldn't be the last. I noticed the shift one morning when I walked into the office and heard Marcus on the phone with a supplier. Our company is looking to streamline vendor relationships. We're implementing new procurement protocols. Like he'd been there since the beginning. Like the sawdust and sweat and 18-hour days had been his too. By the end of that first year, it was my company. My company needs to modernize. My company is hemorrhaging money on outdated processes. My company can't compete if we keep doing things the way your father did them. He said this to Rita Flores, my office manager of 25 years, the woman who'd been hired by Helen herself. Rita told me about it that evening, her voice tight with controlled anger. He actually said that, Mr. Sinclair. Standing in front of your desk, in your office. My office? His office now. Apparently. I said nothing. I went home and looked at Helen's photograph on the mantel and thought about patience, about timing, about the difference between action and reaction. The sign was next. I'd painted that sign myself in 1984, block letters, forest green on cream, with the founding date underneath, Ost, Time Team 84. It had hung outside the building for 40 years, weathering sun and rain and 3 different locations as the company grew. Marcus had it removed on a Tuesday while I was at a doctor's appointment for my annual physical. He didn't ask, didn't mention it. I came back to find a sleek new banner in its place. Modern typography. Gradient background. No founding date. It was falling apart, Marcus said when I asked him about it. Time to update the brand. Where is it? The old sign. I had maintenance dispose of it. 40 years. Thrown in a dumpster like scrap wood. That was my sign, Marcus. It was company property. And I'm director of operations. He smiled. Not warm, not cold, something in between. I make these decisions now, Gordon. That's what you brought me in to do. The photo wall followed a week later. I'd maintained that wall since 1986. Every major project, every happy client standing in front of their finished home or business. Every company milestone, Christmas parties, retirement celebrations. The photo of Helen and me breaking ground on the new building in 1999. Gone. Dated, Marcus said. We need a more professional image. Where are the photos? In storage, somewhere. They weren't in storage. I found them later, water damaged in a box behind the dumpster after a rainstorm. Most were ruined. A few I managed to save, including the one of Helen. The firings came next. Tom Peterson, who had been with me since 1997, 20 years of showing up on time, doing quality work, keeping his crew safe, called me the night Marcus fired him. I asked him about the new vendor, Mr. Sinclair. Premium electrical supply. Never heard of them. Their prices are 30% higher than our regular suppliers, and I said something about it. Next thing I know, I'm being escorted out of the building. Frank DeLuca followed a week later. He'd noticed the same thing about Metro Wire Solutions, another vendor nobody recognized. Susan Chen was next. Terminated after she asked Rita about invoices that didn't match any materials she could find in the warehouse. 3 employees in 3 weeks. All of them people who'd worked for me for more than a decade. All of them questioning the same thing. Vendors that appeared from nowhere, with prices that made no sense. All of them replaced by new hires who owed their jobs to Marcus alone. Rita came to my house on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Susan's termination. I need to show you something. She had a folder in her hands. Printouts. Invoices. What am I looking at? Premium electrical supply. Metro Wire Solutions. Coastal equipment rentals. She spread the papers across my kitchen table. I've never heard of any of them. They started billing us about 5 years ago. The payments are processed through new accounting software Marcus installed. Software I can't audit. I looked at the numbers. $4,800 to premium electrical supply. February 12th. $7,200 to Metro Wire Solutions. March 3rd. Amounts small enough to miss in a monthly review. Large enough to add up. Have you talked to Marcus about this? I tried. He told me to focus on my job and stop asking questions. Rita's voice dropped. He said, if I wasn't happy, I was welcome to follow Tom out the door. I studied the invoices, The company addresses were P.O. boxes. The phone numbers went to voicemail. Rita, can you make copies of these? Already done. She handed me a USB drive. Everything suspicious I've found. 5 years' worth. I started keeping records after the first fake invoice came through. Why didn't you tell me before? You were mourning, Mr. Sinclair. Mrs. Sinclair was barely in the ground. You needed time. She paused. And I needed evidence. Real evidence. Not just suspicions. I held the USB drive in my palm. It weighed almost nothing. It contained everything. Keep doing what you're doing, I said. Keep your head down. Don't let him know you're watching. Yes, sir. And Rita? Thank you. She nodded. Her eyes were wet. Mrs. Sinclair hired me. She paid for my daughter's education. This is the least I can do. The money Marcus took came from 3 shell companies he'd created. Premium Electrical Supply, Metro Wire Solutions, Coastal Equipment Rentals. Each one registered to a P.O. box he controlled, with bank accounts at institutions where Sinclair Electric had no other relationships. I pieced this together over months, reviewing the records Rita provided, cross-referencing with my own files. $280,000. 5 years of phantom invoices for materials never delivered, for equipment never purchased, for services never rendered. The stolen money went to the Riverside Casino. I found this out from Eddie Ramirez, a subcontractor who'd done drywall work for us back in the 90s. Eddie was a poker player who recognized Marcus at the high-stakes tables. Your son-in-law's a whale, Eddie told me over coffee one afternoon. Drops 10, 15,000 a night. Loses most of it. The house loves him. How often? Every couple weeks. Sometimes more. A whale, Eddie called him. Big losses kept coming back. The house loved Marcus Webb. My money. Helen's legacy. Flowing into Marcus Webb's gambling addiction, one chip at a time. But the money wasn't the worst part. I started noticing it at family dinners. The way Candace flinched when Marcus touched her shoulder. The long sleeves she wore even in summer. The excuses that came faster and thinner each month. Tommy has soccer practice. We have dinner plans. You know how Marcus feels about unannounced visits. My grandson Tommy was 8 years old. He used to run to me when I came through the door, his arms outstretched, his face lit with joy. Now I saw him twice a year. Christmas, his birthday. Brief visits where Marcus stood in the corner, watching, timing how long I stayed. I called Candace one evening in April. I'd like to take Tommy fishing this weekend. Just the 2 of us. I don't think that's a good idea, Dad. Why not? Silence on the line. Then, quieter. Marcus doesn't want Tommy getting too attached to you. To his own grandfather. Please, Dad. Just not right now. I wanted to ask about those sleeves. About the bruise on her wrist at Easter. The one she'd covered with a sudden gesture and a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. But I didn't ask. Because I knew if I pushed, she would shut down completely. And then I would lose her too. Pastor Jim called me on a Tuesday evening, 6 months after the wedding. His voice was heavy. I should have said something sooner, Gordon. At the time, I told myself it was pre-wedding nerves. Cold feet. Stress. What are you talking about? The rehearsal dinner. The night before the ceremony. I saw him grab Candace's arm. Hard enough to leave marks. She pulled away, and he smiled at her. And something in that smile I've seen before. In other men. In other marriages that ended badly. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've been watching the news. Domestic violence cases. Patterns of control. And I keep thinking about your daughter, and that smile, and the way she stopped coming to church. His voice broke. I failed her, Gordon. I saw the signs, and I did nothing. I thanked him for calling. I hung up the phone. I sat in my workshop garage for 3 hours, staring at the shipping bottle I'd started the week Helen was diagnosed. The Hum's Victory, 1805. Admiral Nelson's flagship at Trafalgar. A ship that took on the combined fleets of France and Spain against impossible odds. And won. I picked up my tweezers and went back to work. The last piece of evidence came from my grandson. Tommy visited on a Saturday in October, one of the rare occasions Marcus allowed it. Candace dropped him off in the morning, with instructions to have him back by 3. 6 hours. Like, I was borrowing library books instead of spending time with my own flesh and blood. We worked in the garage. I showed Tommy how to strip a wire without nicking the insulation. He was careful, patient. He had his mother's eyes and his grandmother's smile. Around noon, he handed me a folder. "What's this, buddy?" "My art folder. From school." I opened it. Construction paper. Crayons, worn down to stubs. The kind of artwork every grandfather keeps in a drawer for years. But these drawings weren't pictures of trees or houses or smiling stick figures. The first one showed a man with a red face, colored in angry crayon strokes and jagged lines around his mouth. Underneath, in careful letters, "Daddy" yelling. The second showed a woman with blue drops on her cheeks. Blue crayon, pressed hard into the paper. Mommy crying. The third showed a man pushing a woman. Their stick figures were tangled together, the woman falling backward, her arms reaching out. Daddy pushing Mommy. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Tommy, when did you draw these?" "Different times." He shrugged. "I hear them at night sometimes, when I'm supposed to be sleeping." I looked at my grandson, 8 years old, recording what he saw in crayon because he didn't have words for it yet. "Does your mom know about these drawings?" She says, "Don't show anyone." She hides them in her closet. "But you brought them to me." Tommy looked up at me with Helen's eyes. "You're my grandpa. Grandpas fix things, right?" I pulled him close, held him against my chest, felt his small heart beating. "That's right, buddy. Grandpas fix things." I drove him back to the house at 3 o'clock. Candace met us at the door. She was wearing long sleeves. "Thanks, Dad. Anytime." I looked past her, into the house. Marcus stood in the hallway, watching. His face was blank. His eyes were cold. "See you at Christmas, Gordon," he said. I said nothing. I got in my truck. I drove home. That night, I added Tommy's drawings to the fireproof cabinet in my workshop. Next to Rita's USB drive. Next to the wedding video with Marcus's recorded confession. Next to Helen's original partnership agreement with Clause 14C, underlined in red. I picked up my tweezers that night, went back to the Victory. Patience wasn't optional. The evidence was building. The case was coming together. And in the filing cabinet, Helen's margin note waited in her careful handwriting. "He'll need this someday." 120 faces I'd known for 40 years watched my son-in-law Marcus take my podium. "You're too old now, Gordon." He adjusted his cufflink, platinum, like everything else he wore that wasn't earned. "It's time for fresh leadership." The room held its breath. I stood in the back row where he'd positioned me. I let a smile spread across my face. The same smile I gave subcontractors before I fired them. Reached into my jacket. My hand didn't shake. Pulled out a yellowed document dated March 15, 1984. Clause 14C, I said. My wife Helen's handwriting. Her margin notes. Marcus turned white. 3 days earlier, Tuesday morning. I was in my workshop, working on the Victory's mizzenmast, when the mail truck pulled up. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, expensive stock. My name in embossed gold letters. Gordon Sinclair. You are cordially invited to celebrate 40 years of excellence. The retirement celebration of Gordon Sinclair, founder of Sinclair Electric. Riverside Country Club, Hamilton Room. Friday, November 8th, 6 p.m. Hosted by Marcus Webb, Director of Operations. I read it 3 times. Then I set it on my workbench and looked at Helen's photograph, the one I kept next to the fireproof cabinet. "Did you know about this?" I asked the photograph. She didn't answer. She never answered. But I could imagine what she'd say. I hadn't retired. I hadn't been asked. And yet, here was an invitation to my own retirement party, organized by a man who'd been stealing from me for 5 years. The phone rang that evening. Rita's number on the caller ID. "You got the invitation," she said. I got it. He sent them to everyone. Clients, suppliers, the association board. 120 people confirmed. Her voice was tight. The logo redesign order was dated August. The venue deposit, September. He reserved 120 seats before you knew there'd be a party. 3 months of planning. You need to be there, Mr. Sinclair. You need to see what he's planning. I know. Will you go? I thought about the yellowed document in the fireproof cabinet, Helen's handwriting in the margin, paragraph 14, subsection C. I'll go. I spent the next 3 days preparing. Not for the party, for what would come after. I reviewed Rita's files again. $280,000 in fake invoices. 3 shell companies. The pattern of theft laid out in spreadsheets and bank records, and copied purchase orders. I reviewed Tommy's drawings. The red-faced man yelling. The woman with blue tears. The evidence of abuse recorded in Crayon. I reviewed the wedding video, watching Marcus tell his college roommate that 2 years, maybe 3, and the old man will be gone. And I reviewed the 1984 partnership agreement. Helen's margin note. The clause that would invalidate everything Marcus had planned. On Friday afternoon, I pressed my best khakis, put on the flannel shirt Helen had given me for our 35th anniversary, polished my shoes until I could see my reflection. Then I drove to the Riverside Country Club. The Hamilton Room was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a curved staircase with brass railings and burgundy carpet that had been in place since the Reagan administration. I'd been here before, a few times over the years, for industry awards and association dinners. I paused at the top of the stairs. Through the double doors, I could hear the murmur of conversation, the clink of glasses, ice settling in tumblers, the background music of a party in progress. My party. Organized without my knowledge. To celebrate a retirement I'd never requested. I straightened my jacket and walked inside. 120 faces turned toward me. I recognized most of them. Tom Chen, who'd worked with me for 15 years before starting his own shop. Sarah Maddox, who'd referred us to half the commercial clients in the county. Bill Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's grandson, whose family I'd been wiring houses for since 1984. They'd all come to watch me be put out to pasture. The Hamilton Room was arranged for a celebration. Round tables with white cloths. A bar in the corner where ice clinked against glass. A podium at the front of the room, positioned before a large projection screen. And behind the podium, a banner. The new Sinclair Electric banner. The one Marcus had designed. No founding date, just the name in sleek modern typography with a Webb Industries company printed underneath in smaller letters. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. The room where my 40-year career would be summarized and dismissed. People I'd trained, clients I'd served, families whose homes I'd wired. The banner that erased everything I'd built. Marcus spotted me from across the room. He broke away from a conversation with 2 men I didn't recognize and approached with his hand extended. "Gordon, glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it. You look good, healthy." He clapped me on the shoulder, his smile perfect. "Let me get you a drink. We have an open bar, of course." Only the best for tonight. I'm fine. Come on, let me introduce you around. Some of our newer clients, people you haven't met yet. He steered me toward a group near the bar. His hand stayed on my shoulder, guiding me like I was an elderly relative who might wander off. The positioning was subtle but deliberate. He walked slightly ahead, leading me through my own party like a visitor in his house. Everyone, this is Gordon Sinclair, the founder. The founder. Past tense, as if the company had already passed from my hands to his. I shook hands, made small talk, watched Marcus work the room with the easy confidence of a man who'd already won. After 20 minutes, he excused himself to check on the technical setup. I found myself alone near the back of the room, watching the crowd. Old Tom Henderson made his way over, leaning on his cane. He'd retired back in 2012 with his profit-sharing check, but he still came to industry events. "Hell of a thing," Tom said, his voice low. "What's that?" "Your retirement party." "First, I'm hearing about it." "First, I heard about it was 3 days ago." Tom's jaw tightened. "That right?" "That's right. Want me to say something? Make a scene?" "No." I watched Marcus adjust the projector, testing the screen. "I'll handle it." Tom nodded. He understood. We'd worked together for 18 years. He knew how I operated. "If you need anything," he said. "I know." He moved off toward the bar. I stayed where I was, near the back of the room, exactly where Marcus had positioned me. The same spot I'd occupied at his wedding. The back row. The place for people who didn't matter. At 6003, Marcus took the podium. The room fell silent. Conversations faded. Glasses stopped clinking. 120 faces turned toward the front of the room. Marcus stood behind the podium with practiced ease, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his platinum cufflinks catching the light. He'd had the podium positioned perfectly, the Sinclair electric banner behind him, the projector screen to his left. "Good evening, everyone." His voice carried through the room, confident and warm. The voice of a man who believed he was in complete control. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know many of you rearranged your schedules to be here, and that means a great deal to all of us at Sinclair Electric." He paused, letting the moment settle. I'd seen him give presentations before. Every gesture practiced, every word chosen for maximum effect. Tonight, we're celebrating 40 years of excellence. 40 years of quality work. 40 years of service to this community. He smiled at the crowd. Some people smiled back. And we're here to honor the man who made it all possible. Gordon Sinclair, the founder of Sinclair Electric. Scattered claps. 3 beats, maybe 4, then silence. Gordon started this company in 1984 with a borrowed van and a toolbox. He built it into one of the most respected electrical contractors in the region. He trained dozens of journeymen. He served on industry boards. He set standards for quality and safety that we still follow today. Marcus paused. His smile shifted, becoming something else. Something that looked like sympathy, but wasn't. But as we all know, times change. Industries evolve. The business landscape today is completely different from what it was 40 years ago. New technologies, new regulations, new ways of operating that require fresh thinking, fresh perspectives. Fresh thinking. I'd heard that phrase before. From salesmen, from con artists. I felt the shift in the room. People were looking at me now, their expressions uncomfortable. Sometimes, the hardest thing a founder can do is recognize when it's time to step aside. When it's time to let the next generation take the wheel and guide the company into the future. My hand found the document in my jacket pocket. The paper was warm against my chest. Marcus clicked a remote in his hand. The projector hummed to life. A slide appeared on the screen. Web Industries. The name in bold letters. with the Sinclair electric logo redesigned to fit underneath. A Webb Industries company. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that we're moving forward with a new chapter in our company's history. A restructuring that will position us for growth in the decades to come. He clicked again. A new slide. Organizational chart. His name at the top. My name nowhere. Effective January 1st. Controlling interest in Sinclair Electric will transfer to new leadership. Gordon will be stepping back from operations to focus on his health and well-being. My health and well-being. I was 62 years old. I'd passed my last physical with flying colors. I had no health concerns, but Marcus had decided I did. He'd invented them to justify this moment. I want to thank Gordon for his decades of service, Marcus continued. He's earned a rest. He's earned the chance to enjoy his golden years without the burden of day-to-day operations. Rita was standing near the bar, tears running down her cheeks. Old Tom Henderson had stopped drinking, his glass frozen halfway to his mouth. Bill Patterson's wife was whispering to him, her face troubled. This is a new era for Sinclair Electric, Marcus said. A new era of growth, innovation, and success. Webb Industries represents the future. A future we can all be proud of. He clicked the remote again. The final slide appeared. Webb Industries, formerly Sinclair Electric. The founding date erased. My name absent. 40 years of history, compressed into a gradient. The room applauded. Polite. Uncomfortable. The kind of applause that comes from obligation, not enthusiasm. Marcus smiled at me from the podium. The smile of victory. And something shifted inside me. Not anger. I'd been angry for months. This was something else. Something colder, clearer. I thought about Helen. About her sitting at the kitchen table in 1984, drafting the partnership agreement with her brother Michael. About the note she'd written in the margin, in her careful handwriting. You'll need this someday. I thought about the clause she'd insisted on. Paragraph 14, subsection C. Full accounting of all business assets and liabilities, certified by an independent auditor. Before any transfer of ownership interest. Marcus had never asked to see the original agreement. He'd assumed I'd thrown it away. He'd assumed that 40 years of documentation had been lost to time and grief and an old man's fading memory. He'd mistaken my patience for weakness. That was going to cost him everything. I started walking toward the podium. The crowd parted in front of me. Conversations stopped. All eyes followed my progress across the burgundy carpet. Marcus watched me approach. His smile cracked. Just a fracture at the corner of his mouth. Gordon, he said into the microphone. Would you like to say a few words? I reached the podium. Stood beside him. 120 faces stared at us. I would. Marcus stepped aside, gesturing magnanimously. The gracious host, allowing the old man his moment. I stood behind the podium, looked out at the crowd. These were people I'd worked with for decades. People I'd trained. People whose families I'd helped through hard times. They'd come tonight because Marcus had invited them to watch my public execution. They were about to see something else. Thank you all for coming, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. This has been a surprising evening. A few nervous laughs. I want to be clear about something. I didn't know about this party until 3 days ago. I didn't ask to retire. No one consulted me. The laughs stopped. The room went very still. Marcus mentioned that times change, that industries evolve. That's true. I've watched this industry change for 40 years. I've adapted. I've learned. I've kept up with new technologies and new regulations. I turned to look at Marcus. He stood beside the podium, his smile frozen in place. What Marcus didn't mention is that there are certain legal requirements for a transfer of ownership. certain provisions that have to be followed. I reached into my jacket. My hand was steady. I pulled out the yellowed document. 10 pages, single-spaced, dated March 15, 1984. The original partnership agreement, drafted by Helen and her brother Michael, signed and notarized 40 years ago. Before any buyout, I said, we'll need to discuss paragraph 14, subsection C. Marcus's smile collapsed. His face went white. This clause requires full accounting of all business assets and liabilities, certified by an independent auditor, before any transfer of ownership interest can be legally binding. I held up the document so the room could see it. The yellowed paper, the notary stamps, the careful legal language that Helen had insisted on. My wife's handwriting is in the margin. She wrote this note in 1984, when we were just starting out. It says, "He'll need this someday." I set the document on the podium, looked at Marcus. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. The confident director of operations had vanished. What remained was a man who just realized his scheme was built on sand. "She was right," I said. "I need it today." I turned back to the crowd. 120 faces, no longer uncomfortable, alert now. Watching. There will be no buyout. There will be no web industries. And there will be no retirement party, because I haven't retired. I stepped away from the podium. Thank you all for coming. Drive safe. I walked through the silent room, past the round tables with their white cloths, past the bar where Tom Henderson was grinning, past Rita, who had stopped crying and was smiling through her tears. I reached the double doors, pushed them open, stepped into the hallway. Behind me, I heard Marcus's voice, thin and desperate. Gordon, wait. We can discuss this." I didn't stop, didn't turn around. The curb staircase stretched below me, brass railings gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I descended slowly, my hand on the railing, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The Hamilton room was behind me now. Marcus was behind me. The retirement party that was supposed to end my career was behind me. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 6 o'clock. The morning after the party. My workshop garage waited in the dark. The garage door groaned on its tracks as I lifted it. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed to life, casting their familiar pale glow over the workbench where the Hum's Victory waited, half finished. I walked past it without stopping. 4 fireproof filing cabinets stood against the back wall. Gray metal, heavy locks, the same cabinets I'd bought after the Hendersons' lawsuit in 1987. Helen had organized them herself, color-coded tabs and typed labels, every document in its place. I unlocked the first cabinet. Contracts from 1984 to 1994. The paper smelled like old ink and dry storage, the particular scent of decades preserved against fire and flood. The second cabinet held 1995 to 2005. I ran my fingers across the tabs, feeling the weight of years passing under my hand. The third cabinet, 2006 to 2016. And there, in the back of the bottom drawer, exactly where Helen had told me it would be, I found the folder marked trust documents in her neat handwriting. I carried it to the workbench and sat down on the stool where I'd spent 1,000 nights building ships in bottles. The folder was thick, maybe 40 pages. Legal-size paper, the expensive kind, Helen always insisted on for anything that mattered. The first page was a cover letter from Morrison and Associates, dated 2 months before Helen died. I'd been so focused on her care, on holding her hand through the pain, that I hadn't noticed her making these arrangements. I'd seen this folder before, briefly, in the fog of grief after the funeral. But I hadn't read it, hadn't been ready. Now I was. "Dear Gordon," the letter began. "At Helen's request, I have updated the trust documents to reflect her final wishes. The provisions below supersede all previous arrangements." I read through the pages slowly, letting each word sink in. The life insurance policy. $500,000. I'd known about that, of course. What I hadn't known was where it went. Helen had redirected the entire amount to a trust administered by her brother Michael. The trust was for my care, for Candace's direct needs, and for Tommy's education. The language was specific, precise, the kind of drafting that only someone who understood lawyers could produce. And in paragraph 3, subsection B, a single sentence that made me set the papers down and stare at the wall for a full minute. The trust explicitly excludes any spouse of the beneficiary from accessing trust funds, whether through divorce, death, or any legal proceeding. Any spouse of the beneficiary. Marcus. Helen had seen it coming 18 months before she died, before Marcus had even begun his embezzlement scheme. She'd built a wall around her money that he couldn't breach. The partnership agreement from 1984 protected the company. The trust protected the money. Two separate fortresses, built by the same architect. My shoulders dropped. The tension in my jaw released for the first time in weeks. I picked up my phone and dialed Michael Morrison's office. His secretary answered on the second ring. Morrison and Associates. This is Gordon Sinclair. I need to speak with Michael. Mr. Sinclair, of course. One moment. The hold music lasted 30 seconds. Then, Michael's voice, the same measured tone I remembered from 40 years of family dinners. Gordon, I wondered when I'd hear from you. You've been waiting. Since the day Helen passed. He paused. She made me promise not to contact you first. Said you'd call when you were ready. I'm ready. Good. What do you need? The trust documents. I found them in the cabinet this morning. I need to understand exactly what she did. Helen updated her trust 2 months before she passed away. She was very specific about what she wanted. Michael's voice softened. She knew, Gordon. She knew what was coming. The life insurance. $500,000. All of it in a trust I administer. Marcus can't touch it through Candace. He can't access it through divorce, through manipulation, through any legal means. Helen made sure of that. I looked at the papers spread across my workbench. The precise language, the exact provisions, the margin notes in Helen's handwriting. She anticipated this. She did. She told me, Michael, Gordon's going to need protection after I'm gone. Not from creditors, not from business problems, from family. She didn't say Marcus's name. She didn't have to. I closed my eyes. Even from the grave, Helen was taking care of me. What else did she tell you? She said when you called, I should be ready to help. That there would be evidence. That you would have everything you needed. Michael paused. She said to tell you the filing cabinets, 3rd drawer, exactly where I told you. Was she right? She was right. Gordon, I'm at your service. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. Helen was my sister. This is personal. I'll be in touch. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my workshop, surrounded by 40 years of documentation and the ghost of a woman who had seen the future more clearly than I ever could. The doorbell rang at 7 that evening. Rita Flores stood on my front porch, her coat buttoned against the November wind. The air smelled of dead leaves and coming frost. In her arms, she carried a metal box the size of a small suitcase. A fireproof safe, the same brand I kept in my workshop. Mr. Sinclair. Rita, come in. She stepped inside, her eyes moving around the living room. Helen's photograph on the mantel, the furniture we'd bought together 30 years ago. The silence of a house that used to hold 2 people. I brought everything, she said. I led her to the kitchen table. She set the safe down, and I noticed her hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something else. 5 years. Her voice dropped. 5 years. I've been collecting this. Waiting. Waiting for what? For you to be ready. She looked at me, her eyes wet. Mrs. Sinclair hired me. She paid for my daughter's education. When she died, I promised myself I'd protect what she built. What you both built. She worked the combination lock on the safe. The lid swung open. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were manila folders, USB drives, and handwritten notebooks. 5 years of records she'd kept alone. 127 invoices. Rita pulled out the first stack. Premium electrical supply. Metro Wire Solutions. Coastal equipment rentals. I recognized them as fake the moment they came through. No phone numbers that worked. No addresses that matched any real supplier. I spread the invoices across the table. Each one documented. Each one dated. Each one a thread in the web Marcus had woven. I kept a log. Rita handed me a spiral notebook, its pages covered in her precise handwriting. Every irregular transaction. Every payment that didn't make sense. Every time he told me to expedite a check to one of those vendors. I flipped through the pages. Dates, amounts, notes. Rita had recorded everything. The email printouts are here too. She pulled out another folder. His instructions, in writing. Process the premium electrical payment today. Don't wait for the usual approval chain. This one's time-sensitive. I read through the emails. Marcus's words, typed and sent, each one a confession he didn't know he was making. And this. Rita held up a USB drive. My nephew works in IT. I asked him to help me recover some deleted files from the company servers. Files. Marcus thought he'd erased. What's on it? The original invoices before he altered them. The real amounts. The difference between what we paid and what we received. Her voice hardened. The proof of exactly how much he stole. I took the USB drive and held it in my palm. Small enough to fit in my pocket. Heavy enough to end a career. 3 years. Rita's voice was low. For 3 years, I've been waiting to give this to you. I wanted to come forward earlier, but you were grieving. Mrs. Sinclair had just passed. I couldn't add to your burden. You did the right thing. Did I? She looked at me, her eyes searching. Sometimes I wondered if I was seeing things that weren't there. But then I'd run the numbers again, and they never added up. They never added up. I put my hand on her shoulder. You're not wrong, Rita. You're the most loyal person I've ever employed. And this is going to matter. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. What happens now? Now I make some phone calls. Barbara Okonkwo at the DA's white-collar crime unit answered on the third ring. Hello, Barbara? This is Gordon Sinclair. A pause, then her voice, warm but curious. Mr. Sinclair, it's been a while. 5 years. Your mother's house. I still think about what you did for her. In 2019, I'd spent 3 weekends rewiring Barbara's elderly mother's home after a scam contractor had left it dangerous. Exposed wires, faulty breakers, the kind of work that could have killed someone. I'd charged her cost for materials, nothing more. I need a favor, I said. Name it. I have evidence of embezzlement. A son-in-law, 5 years of fake vendors, forged invoices, missing funds. I need someone who can turn this into a case. Silence on the line. Then Barbara's voice, different now. Professional. You're talking about white-collar crime. That's my unit. I know. Give me what you have. I'll expedite the forensic audit. I spent the next hour on the phone with Barbara, walking her through Rita's documentation, explaining the pattern of theft, answering her questions about timeline and amounts. 280,000, she said when I finished. That's a significant sum. It's everything I built for 40 years, stolen one fake invoice at a time. I'll have my team start tomorrow. We'll trace the shell companies, subpoena the bank records, document the full extent. If what you're telling me is accurate, this is a solid case. It's accurate. Then we'll prove it. The forensic audit took 2 weeks. Barbara called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice tightened. Controlled anger. We found everything. The 3 shell companies, all registered to the same P.O. box in Delaware. The bank accounts, the wire transfers, the paper trail. $280,000 over 5 years, just like Rita documented. What else? Gambling debts. She paused. Your son-in-law has a problem. Riverside Casino has him on their credit line for $45,000. And there's a private bookmaker, someone named Vincenzo, who's owed another $80,000. I thought about Marcus in his expensive suits, his platinum cufflinks, his wine collection. All of it funded by money he'd stolen from me. My money. Flowing into slot machines and card tables. There's more, Barbara said. And this one's worse. Tell me. We found a power of attorney document. Your son-in-law used it to list a property for sale. A lake house. My chest tightened. The lake house. Helen's ashes. The notary stamp is from a county where neither your daughter nor your son-in-law has ever resided. And the signature doesn't match your daughter's authentic signature on file with the county recorder's office. It's forged. It's forged. We're adding forgery and fraud to the charges. I sat down in my kitchen chair, my hands flat on the table. Marcus had tried to sell the lake house, the place where I'd scattered Helen's ashes from the dock at sunset, watching the last of her drift across the water she'd loved. He'd tried to sell her resting place. Gordon? Barbara's voice came through the phone. Are you still there? I'm here. We have enough for an arrest warrant. But I want to give you the option to build a stronger case first. More charges mean more leverage. More leverage means a longer sentence. What do you suggest? Give me another week. Let me dig deeper. Take the week. I hung up the phone and stared at Helen's photograph on the mantel. Her smile frozen in time. Her eyes seeing something I couldn't. He tried to sell your lake house, I told her silently, but he won't. I promise you that. The calls came in over the next few days. First was Ed Martinez, retired electrical inspector, a man I'd known for 30 years. Gordon, I reviewed those job files you sent me, the ones from the last 2 years. What did you find? Problems. Serious problems. I've got 12 commercial installations with code violations, underrated wiring, non-compliant junction boxes, uncertified subcontractors, the kind of work that gets people killed. Document everything. Already done. I've got photos, specification sheets, signed statements from 3 other retired inspectors who reviewed the work. This isn't borderline stuff, Gordon. This is liability. The kind that voids insurance policies and creates personal exposure that can't be discharged in bankruptcy. Next was Tom Henderson, calling from his fishing boat. Word's getting around. The association members are talking. They're saying Marcus cut corners, hired unlicensed crews, signed off on work he never inspected. People are angry, Gordon. They trusted the Sinclair name. They should be angry. They're ready to testify. Whenever you need them. The network I'd built over 40 years was waking up. Contractors, inspectors, suppliers, clients, people who remembered the quality work and the fair dealing. People who saw what Marcus had done to the name I'd spent a lifetime building. Tommy came for a supervised visit on a Saturday afternoon. Candace dropped him off at the door, her eyes avoiding mine. She wore a long-sleeved shirt, despite the mild weather. I didn't comment. Not yet. 2 hours, she said. Marcus wants him back by 4. 2 hours. Tommy ran into the house, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. I closed the door and followed him to the kitchen, where he was already climbing onto a stool at the counter. Grandpa, can we work on the boat? In a little while. First, show me what you've been drawing. He pulled his art folder from his backpack, the same folder I'd seen before. Construction paper, crayons worn to nubs, the work of an 8-year-old recording his world in color. But the drawings had changed. The first one showed a man in a suit meeting a woman at a table. The man had dark hair. The woman had a camera around her neck. Underneath, in Tommy's block letters, the lady at the coffee shop. "Who's this?" I asked. "That's Daddy. And that's the lady he talks to sometimes. She takes pictures." The real estate agent. The one handling the lake house listing. The second drawing showed a house on a lake. Blue water, green trees, a dock stretching into the waves. And a woman with a camera standing on the porch. Grandma's lake house with the camera lady. The paper felt rough between my fingers. Faint wax smell rose from the crayon strokes. Tommy had seen them taking listing photos. He'd been there when they photographed the house Marcus was trying to sell without my knowledge. The third drawing made me set the folder down and take a breath. A man pushing a woman. Their stick figures tangled together. The woman falling backward, her arms reaching out. Red marks on the woman's arms. Daddy pushing Mommy. Tommy looked up at me with his grandmother's eyes. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" I pulled him close, held him against my chest, felt his small heart beating. "Grandpa's fixed things," I said. "That's what we do." 6 weeks after the retirement party, I sat in my workshop garage and looked at what I'd assembled. On the workbench, spread out in neat rows, Helen's trust documents, protecting her money from Marcus's reach. Rita's evidence safe, 5 years of documentation. Barbara's forensic audit, tracing $280,000 of embezzlement. The code violation reports from retired inspectors, 12 installations that could kill someone. The forged power of attorney, Marcus's attempt to sell Helen's resting place, and Tommy's drawings. An 8-year-old's testimony in crayon. I picked up the phone and dialed Michael Morrison's office. "Michael, it's Gordon." "Gordon, what do you need?" "I'm ready." "Set up a meeting at the Hamilton room, the same room where Marcus threw my retirement party." "When?" 2 weeks from now. Friday evening. "Tell Marcus it's a reconciliation dinner." A pause on the line. Then Michael's voice, understanding. "He'll think you're surrendering." "Let him think that." "What should I tell him?" "Tell him I want to discuss terms. Tell him I'm tired of fighting. Tell him whatever he needs to hear to make him show up with his lawyer." "And what will actually happen?" I looked at the evidence spread across my workbench. The work of 40 years, distilled into proof of betrayal. Justice. That's what will happen. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my workshop. The Hum's victory waited on its shelf, still unfinished. Helen's photograph watched from the wall, her smile knowing something I was just beginning to understand. She'd prepared for this. All of it. The provisions, the documentation, the network of people who owed me favors and remembered her kindness. She'd built an arsenal and left it waiting for me to find. I picked up my tweezers and went back to work on the ship. I threaded the mizzen rigging through the bottle's neck, one strand at a time. Patience wasn't optional in this work. It never had been. Marcus arrived at the Hamilton room at 6 o'clock sharp. He stepped out of his BMW, adjusting his platinum cufflinks, wearing his best suit and most expensive watch. The confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. 2 weeks since Michael Morrison had called him about a reconciliation dinner. 2 weeks since Marcus had started imagining what terms I might accept for my surrender. He thought this was my capitulation. His corporate attorney followed 2 steps behind, a man named Peterson, whose firm handled mergers and acquisitions. Good at contracts, no experience with criminal law. Marcus had brought a knife to a gunfight. I stood at the head of the conference table, hands flat on the polished wood. The Hamilton room looked different tonight. No round tables with white cloths. No bar in the corner. No celebration banner. Just a rectangular conference table with 6 chairs, 3 boxes of documents stacked at my end, a laptop on a stand near the corner where Rita Flores sat, her fingers resting on the keyboard. And at the door, 2 figures Marcus didn't recognize yet. Michael Morrison, my attorney and Helen's brother, sat to my right. His briefcase was open, papers arranged in precise stacks. Through the glass partition that separated the main room from a smaller side office, Candace sat with Tommy on a leather couch. A suitcase rested at her feet. She'd packed it that morning while Marcus was at the gym. The bruises on her arms had finally faded enough to show. Marcus pushed through the double doors, his smile already in place. The same smile he'd worn at my retirement party. The smile of a man who believed he controlled the room. Then he saw the table, the boxes, Rita at her laptop, the 2 people by the door. The smile flickered. Barbara Okonkwo stepped forward, 52 years old, forensic accountant with the DA's white-collar crime unit. I'd rewired her mother's house 5 years ago after a scam contractor left it dangerous. Behind her stood 2 investigators in dark suits. Marcus stopped walking. His attorney nearly collided with his back. "What is this, Gordon?" Marcus's voice carried across the room. Still confident, still trying to control. "Some kind of ambush?" I gestured to the chair at the far end of the table. "Sit down, Marcus. We have a lot to discuss. I came here to talk terms. To reach a reasonable arrangement." He looked at the investigators, at Barbara, at the 3 boxes of documents. "This isn't what we agreed to. Sit down." He moved, crossed the room, pulled out the chair, lowered himself into it. Peterson took the seat beside him, already pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. I remained standing. "Starting with premium electrical supply," I said. "Metro Wire Solutions. Coastal Equipment Rentals." Marcus went white. His confident mask cracked. He stared at me but said nothing. I opened the first box. Inside were manila folders, bank statements, invoices arranged in chronological order. 5 years of documentation that Rita had assembled in secret, waiting for this moment. 127 invoices. I laid the first stack on the table. Premium electrical supply. A vendor that doesn't exist. The address is a P.O. box you control. The bank account traces back to a shell company registered in Delaware. Peterson leaned forward, scanning the documents. His face went pale. "Rita has been tracking these transactions since they started." I nodded toward her. Every fake invoice, every irregular payment, every time you told her to expedite a check without the usual approval chain. Rita clicked a key on her laptop. The screen behind her lit up with a spreadsheet. Columns of numbers, dates, amounts. $280,000, Rita said. Her voice was steady. "For 5 years. The pattern is consistent. Cash withdrawals from your personal account, followed within 72 hours by deposits from the shell vendors." Marcus sat rigid in his chair. His attorney was writing furiously, filling the legal pad with notes, bank records. I dropped another folder on the table. Subpoenaed by the DA's office 3 weeks ago. The wire transfers, the routing numbers, the exact timing of every transaction. Barbara Okonkwo moved to the table, picked up one of the folders. "Mr. Webb, I've spent 15 years investigating financial crimes. This paper trail is textbook embezzlement. 3 shell companies, all created within 6 months of your appointment as Director of Operations, all billing Sinclair Electric for materials that were never delivered." Marcus's jaw tightened. He said nothing. I opened the second box. Inside were photographs, wiring installations, junction boxes, electrical panels in commercial buildings across 3 counties, 12 commercial projects in the last 2 years. I spread the photographs across the table. "Everyone approved under your signature." Everyone with code violations that void our liability insurance. Peterson stopped writing. His pen hovered over the pad. Underrated wiring. I pointed to the first photograph. Non-compliant junction boxes. The second, uncertified subcontractors doing work that requires master electrician certification. The third, Ed Martinez, retired inspector, had documented everything. Photos, specification sheets, signed statements from 3 other retired inspectors who'd reviewed the work. These violations create personal liability, I said. Not just company liability. Personal. The kind that can't be discharged in bankruptcy. Marcus's attorney leaned close, whispering urgently. I caught fragments. Catastrophic. Criminal negligence. Personal exposure. If anyone dies from faulty wiring in these buildings, I continued, you're responsible. Your signature. Your approval. Your negligence. The silence stretched. Marcus sat frozen, his expensive watch catching the overhead lights. I opened the third box. On top were Tommy's drawings. Construction paper, crayon strokes, the careful block letters of an 8-year-old recording what he saw. Daddy yelling, Mommy crying, Daddy pushing Mommy. I laid them on the table one at a time. My grandson made these. My voice stayed level, quiet. The evidence did the shouting. He hears you at night. He draws what he sees. Marcus's face went gray. Through the glass partition, I saw Candace watching. Her hand rested on Tommy's shoulder. Barbara stepped forward with a manila envelope. Medical records, she said. Emergency room visits, obtained through our investigation. Bruises, she explained away. A fractured wrist, in March of last year. A split lip in August. Peterson put down his pen. He stared at his client with something new in his eyes. Pastor Jim Colvin provided a written statement. I added another document to the pile. He saw you grab Candace's arm the night before your wedding. Hard enough to leave marks. He saw the red flags. He's been carrying guilt for 6 years. The Hamilton room was silent, except for the hum of the laptop and the scratch of Barbara's pen as she made notes. And this. I pulled out the final document. A power of attorney you created to list the lake house for sale. The notary stamp is from a county where neither you nor Candace has ever resided. The signature doesn't match my daughter's authentic signature on file with the county recorder's office. I held it up so the room could see. Forged. Blatant. Desperate. You tried to sell the place where I scattered my wife's ashes. Barbara Okonkwo moved to stand beside the table. Her voice was formal, professional. Marcus Webb, based on the evidence presented, the district attorney's office is prepared to file the following charges. Embezzlement. Elder financial abuse under state statutes. A Class C felony carrying 3 to 10 years, with enhanced penalties for family members. Forgery. Fraud. She paused, looked at the glass partition where Candace sat with Tommy. And pending Mrs. Webb's cooperation, domestic assault. Marcus stood up so fast, his chair scraped against the floor. You think you can threaten me? His voice rose, the polish cracking. You're a senile old man who doesn't even remember what day it is. Who's going to believe you? The board answers to me. Your daughter knows which side her. I held up the 1984 partnership agreement, the yellowed paper, the notary stamps, Helen's handwriting in the margin, full accounting of all business assets required before any transfer of ownership interest, I read. Independent auditor. Notarized, March 15th, 1984. Marcus fell silent. You never even asked to see the original document. I set it on the table. You assumed I'd thrown it away. You assumed that 40 years of records had been lost to time and grief and an old man's fading memory. I looked at him across the length of the conference table. The man who'd announced Webb Industries. The man who'd stolen my money abused my daughter, tried to sell my wife's resting place. You've mistaken my patience for weakness, Marcus. Marcus, that's going to cost you everything. Peterson touched his client's arm. Marcus sat back down, his movements mechanical. I strongly advise immediate cooperation with the DA's office, Peterson said. His voice was flat. There's no defense here. The evidence is overwhelming. Barbara nodded. We'll need a full statement. Tonight. I gathered my documents, placed them back in the boxes with the same deliberate precision I'd used to build the case. One more thing. Marcus looked up. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. The confident director of operations had vanished. What remained was a man who'd just realized his entire world was collapsing. The lake house, I said. The place where you tried to sell my wife's resting place. It stays in the family. I thought of Helen's trust documents. The provision she'd made, anticipating this day. Helen made sure of that. Some things you don't get to touch. I walked toward the glass partition. Candace stood as I approached, Tommy's hand in hers. The suitcase waited at her feet. She looked at me with her mother's eyes, wet with tears but steady. Resolved. Thank you, Dad. I put my hand on her shoulder. Felt her flinch, then relax. The flinch of a woman who'd been hit too many times. The relaxation of a woman who is finally safe. Let's go home. We walked out of the Hamilton room together. My daughter. My grandson. The family Marcus had tried to destroy. Behind us, I heard Barbara's voice, calm and professional. Mr. Webb, we'll need you to come with us. I didn't look back. The curved staircase stretched below us, brass railings gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The same burgundy carpet I'd walked 6 weeks ago. The same brass fixtures. Different ending. Tommy held my hand as we descended, his small fingers wrapped around mine. Grandpa, is Daddy in trouble? I looked down at my grandson, 8 years old, recording the world in crayon because he didn't have words for it yet. Your daddy made some bad choices, I said. He's going to have to answer for them. Tommy nodded. He didn't seem surprised. We reached the lobby. Through the glass doors, I could see the parking lot, the November evening settling into darkness. Candace stopped walking. She was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I should have left sooner. Her voice was barely audible. I should have told you. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. She shook her head. He isolated me. From you, from everyone. He made me believe no one would help. That I deserved what was happening. I pulled her close, felt her shoulders shake with sobs she'd been holding for years. Your mother knew, I said quietly. She saw it coming before anyone else. She prepared for this day. Candace pulled back, wiping her eyes. Mom, the trust documents. The provisions that protect you and Tommy. She wrote them 2 months before she died. I touched her face, the same gesture Helen used to make. She loved you enough to plan for this. Tommy tugged at my hand. Are we going to Grandpa's house? I looked at my daughter. She nodded. Yeah, buddy. We're going to Grandpa's house. The 3 of us walked through the glass doors into the November evening. The air was cold, carrying the smell of dead leaves and coming frost. Behind us, the Riverside Country Club stood silent and tall. The Hamilton room where Marcus had announced my retirement. The Hamilton room where I'd watched his world collapse. The same room, different outcome. I unlocked my truck and helped Tommy into the back seat. Candace climbed into the passenger side, the suitcase wedged between her feet. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the club's windows, I could see figures moving. Barbara, Okonkwo. Her investigators. Marcus, his hands at his sides, his head bowed. 6 weeks ago, I'd stood in the back of that room while my son-in-law announced the end of my career. I'd walked out with a yellowed document and a promise to myself. Justice. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed home. Tommy was already half asleep in the back seat, his head against the window. Candace stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. Dad? Yeah? How did you know? About the shell companies, the violations, all of it. I thought about Rita, sitting alone in her home office for 5 years, copying documents and keeping logs. About Tom Henderson and the contractors who'd noticed the declining quality. About Barbara Okonkwo and the favor she'd been waiting to repay. I didn't build this company alone, I said. I built it with people who remembered that. Candace was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on my arm. I'm sorry I didn't see him sooner. What he really was. He was good at hiding it. Not good enough, she said. Not from you. I thought about Helen. About the note she'd written in the margin of that partnership agreement 40 years ago. He'll need this someday. She'd seen it coming. She prepared the weapons and left them waiting in the filing cabinets. And when the time came, they'd been exactly where she said they'd be. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness as we turned onto my street. The ranch house waited at the end, porch light glowing. The garage where I'd built ships in bottles and assembled evidence standing dark and quiet. Home. I parked in the driveway and helped Tommy out of the back seat. He was fully awake now, looking around at the house he barely knew. Is this where we're staying? For now, I said, until we figure out what comes next. Candace carried the suitcase to the front door. I unlocked it and stepped inside, turning on lights as I went. Helen's photograph still sat on the mantel. Her smile frozen in time, her eyes seeing something I couldn't. I crossed the room and touched the frame. I kept my promise, I said quietly. They're safe now. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But I could imagine what she'd say. I know. I always knew you would. Tommy appeared beside me, his head tilted as he studied the photograph. Is that Grandma? That's Grandma. She looks nice. She was the best person I ever knew. Tommy considered this for a moment. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Grandpa, can we work on the boat now? I looked at the clock. Almost 8, past a normal bedtime. But nothing about this day had been normal. Sure, buddy. Let's work on the boat. I led him through the kitchen to the garage door. The workshop waited in darkness until I hit the light switch. The Hum's Victory sat on the workbench, still unfinished. The mizzenmast I'd been working on when the invitation arrived. The rigging I'd threaded through the bottle's neck, one strand at a time. I pulled out the stool and lifted Tommy onto it, handed him the tweezers. Careful, I said. This part's delicate. He bent over the bottle, tongue poking out in concentration. The same expression Helen used to make when she was working on something important. Behind us, Candace stood in the doorway, watching. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I looked at the ship, nearly complete after 18 months of work. Started the week Helen was diagnosed. Worked on through her treatment, her decline, her death. Through the grief that followed. Through the discovery of Marcus's betrayal. Through the patient assembly of evidence and the final confrontation. One strand at a time. Grandpa? Tommy looked up at me. How do you get the boat inside the bottle? I smiled. The same question I'd asked my father 50 years ago. Patience, I said. You fold everything flat, slide it through the neck, and then you build it back up once it's inside. One piece at a time. Tommy nodded, considering this. That sounds hard. It is hard. But the hard things are usually worth doing. He went back to work, his small hands steadier than I'd expected. I watched him for a moment. This 8-year-old boy who'd recorded his father's abuse in Crayon and handed the evidence to his grandfather without knowing what he'd done. He deserved better than Marcus Webb. He deserved a future, uncorrupted by his father's lies. Now he had a chance at one. The filing cabinet stood against the wall, gray metal and heavy locks. 40 years of documentation. Helen's provisions, Rita's evidence, the proof that had brought Marcus down. I'd built this company with $800 and a promise. I'd protected it with documentation and patience. And when a predator tried to take it, I'd used every tool at my disposal to stop him. The same way I'd protect my family. The same way I'd protect my grandson. Helen's note still echoed in my mind. He'll need this someday. She was right. She was always right. I picked up a second pair of tweezers and joined Tommy at the workbench. Together, we threaded the rigging through the bottle's neck, one strand at a time. 72 hours after the Hamilton room. The call came at 6 a.m. Barbara Okonkwo's voice was steady. "We're making the arrest this morning. Thought you'd want to know." I thanked her, hung up the phone, sat in my workshop for a long moment, looking at Helen's photograph on the wall. "It's happening," I told her. The arrest took place at 8:47 a.m. at the Meadowbrook Estates house Marcus had bought with my money. A 5-bedroom colonial in the nicest subdivision in the county. $650,000. Financed partly through embezzled Sinclair electric funds, disguised as performance bonuses he'd awarded himself. I learned the details later from Barbara's report. 2 patrol cars. 4 officers. A detective I didn't know. And Barbara herself, there to ensure the white-collar charges were handled properly. Marcus answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee cup in hand. His face showed confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked like genuine surprise. As if he'd convinced himself the Hamilton room confrontation had been a bluff. As if 40 years of documentation could be wished away. They cuffed him in his driveway. The neighbors watched from their windows. By noon, the story was spreading through the industry network I'd built over 4 decades. The mortgage on that house was 3 months behind. Barbara told me later, after the subpoenas came through. Marcus had hidden the delinquency by intercepting the mail. Candace never saw the warning letters. Never knew they were one payment away from foreclosure proceedings. The bank initiated those proceedings the week after the arrest. Without Marcus's income, without access to the frozen accounts, there was no way to catch up. The house went on the market as a distressed property within the month. The criminal charges came in waves. First, financial exploitation of an elderly person. State elder abuse statutes. Class C felony. 3 to 10 years, with enhanced penalties because the perpetrator was a family member. Barbara had pushed for this classification rather than simple embezzlement. The sentence enhancement alone added 2 years to the minimum. Second, forgery. The fraudulent power of attorney Marcus had used to list the lake house. The notary who'd stamped it, a man named Carl Whitfield who owed Marcus gambling debts, faced his own prosecution. Carl cooperated within 48 hours of his arrest, providing a full written statement implicating Marcus in exchange for reduced charges. He described sitting in Marcus's home office, while Marcus guided Candace's signature practice. Third, fraud. 3 shell companies, $280,000 in fake invoices. 5 years of systematic theft, documented in spreadsheets and bank records and the handwritten logs Rita had kept in her fireproof safe. The domestic assault charges came last. Candace gave her statement on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the arrest. I drove her to the DA's office and waited in the hallway while she spent 3 hours with a victim advocate and an assistant prosecutor. When she came out, her eyes were red, but her shoulders were straight. "I told them everything," she said. I put my arm around her. "You did the right thing." The charges were filed the following Monday. Domestic assault, battery, criminal threatening. Each one documented by emergency room records, by Tommy's drawings, by Pastor Jim's written statement about what he'd witnessed the night before the wedding. Marcus's gambling creditors moved faster than the legal system. The week after his arrest, two men visited Peterson's law office. Peterson had withdrawn from the case by then, citing conflict of interest. But they found his address easily enough. They left photographs on the receptionist's desk. Marcus's BMW in his mother's driveway. His mother's house from 3 angles. The climate-controlled wine storage facility where Marcus kept his collection. The message was clear. $80,000 owed to the private bookmaker. No more extensions, no more excuses. The casino debt, $45,000, went to collections the same week. Aggressive collections. The kind that called at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. The kind that sent letters to Marcus's mother's house, to his former office, to everywhere they could think of. Marcus couldn't pay. His accounts were frozen. The house was gone. The company he tried to steal was no longer his to access. The wine collection was all he had left. I heard about the auction from Ed Martinez, who heard about it from a friend in the restaurant industry. The liquidation happened at a specialty auction house in Baltimore, the kind of place where serious collectors gathered to bid on rare bottles. Marcus's collection sold for $12,000. I read the auction report later. 27 bottles of what Marcus had claimed were investment-grade wines. Burgundies he bragged about at dinner parties. Bordeaux he displayed on special occasions. The pride of a man who wanted everyone to know he had taste. Most bottles were ruined. Wrong temperature for years. The sommelier who inspected the collection noted that the storage temperature had fluctuated wildly. Marcus had kept his prized Burgundies at 62 degrees when they needed 55. The cork seals had deteriorated. The wines had oxidized. Bottles he paid $800 for were worth $20 at auction. A man who'd built his identity on sophistication couldn't even store wine correctly. 2 weeks after the arrest, I called a company meeting. The conference room at Sinclair Electric still bore the marks of Marcus's occupation. The photo wall was gone. The founding date had been erased from the banner behind the podium. The profit-sharing plan had been eliminated 2 years earlier, replaced with performance bonuses Marcus controlled. 30 employees gathered that afternoon. Some I'd worked with for decades. Others I barely recognized. The new hires Marcus had brought in to replace the people who questioned him. Rita stood near the back, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd been waiting for this moment for 5 years. I walked to the podium, the same podium where Marcus had announced my retirement. The same room where he'd displayed the Web Industries logo for the first time. "I'm not retiring," I said. "I never was." The room was silent. 30 faces watched me, some confused, some relieved, a few still uncertain what was happening. What happened at the retirement party was not my choice. What happened afterward, with the arrest, you've probably heard about through various channels. I paused. I'm here to tell you what happens next. I looked at the faces I recognized. Tom Chen's nephew, who'd started as an apprentice 5 years ago. Bill Patterson's daughter, who handled accounts receivable. The foreman who'd kept projects running despite Marcus's interference. The profit-sharing plan Marcus eliminated is being reinstated. A murmur ran through the room. Rita pressed her hand to her mouth. Effective immediately, I continued. Backdated to cover the 2 years you were cheated out of your share. Frank DeLuca, one of the 3 employees Marcus had fired for questioning the fake vendors, started crying. I'd rehired him the day after the arrest. This company was built on a promise, I said. That if you work hard, if you do quality work, if you treat people right, you'll be taken care of. That promise was broken. I'm here to fix it. Rita was crying openly now. So was half the room. I'm 62 years old. I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm not going anywhere. And neither is the name Sinclair Electric. After the meeting, I walked through the building. The photo wall was gone, but the frames weren't. They'd been stored in a closet Marcus had overlooked. I spent that weekend putting them back up myself. 40 years of projects. 40 years of satisfied clients. The photograph of Helen and me breaking ground on this building in 1999. The founding date went back on the sign the following week. Est. 1984. Where it belonged. The civil suit was filed in late December. Michael Morrison's firm handled the litigation. Elder abuse statutes allowed for treble damages, 3 times the documented loss. $280,000 in embezzlement became $840,000 in civil liability. Marcus's corporate attorney had withdrawn weeks earlier. The public defender assigned to his criminal case had no experience with white-collar crimes. He'd spent his career handling drug possession and petty theft. The forensic accounting evidence, the bank records, the shell company documentation. It was beyond anything he'd ever faced. The criminal trial began in February. 4 days. The prosecution presented their case methodically, building the narrative piece by piece. Barbara Okonkwo testified first. She walked the jury through the financial evidence. The flow of money from Sinclair Electric to the shell companies, to Marcus's personal accounts. Spreadsheets filled the screens. Bank statements documented every transaction. $280,000. 5 years. Every penny traced. The notary, Carl Whitfield, took the stand next. He described Marcus's instructions in detail. The practice signatures. The county where the stamp was purchased, specifically chosen because no one would check the records. The gambling debt that had made Carl vulnerable to manipulation. Tommy's drawings were admitted as evidence on the second day. The prosecutor held them up one at a time. Daddy yelling, Mommy crying, Daddy pushing Mommy. An 8-year-old's testimony in crayon. The jury looked at the construction paper and the block letters and the stick figures, and I watched their faces change. Candace testified on the 3rd day. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded in her lap. The prosecutor asked about the isolation, about the financial control, about the escalating violence she'd hidden from everyone, including me. He told me no one would believe me, she said. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. He said if I left, he'd make sure I never saw Tommy again. He said my father was old and confused and wouldn't be able to help me. The jury watched her. 12 faces, some sympathetic, some neutral. All of them listening. The first time he hit me was 3 months after the wedding. He apologized afterward. Bought me flowers. Said it would never happen again. She paused. It happened again. And again. I learned to wear long sleeves. Pastor Jim Colvin took the stand after Candace. He described what he'd seen at the rehearsal dinner, the night before the wedding. Marcus grabbing Candace's arm. The marks left behind. The smile that followed, the one that had haunted Jim for 6 years. I should have said something then, Jim told the jury. I saw the warning signs, and I told myself it was stress. Pre-wedding nerves. I failed her. 14 witnesses took the stand over the 4th day. Tom Peterson, who Marcus had fired for questioning the fake vendors. Frank DeLuca, who'd lost his job for noticing the same irregularities. Susan Chen, terminated for asking Rita about invoices that didn't match any materials in the warehouse. Contractors described projects where Marcus had approved substandard work. Suppliers described invoices that were inflated or fabricated entirely. Industry colleagues described watching Sinclair Electric's reputation decline under Marcus's leadership. The public defender called one witness, Marcus himself. His testimony lasted 12 minutes. He tried to explain, tried to justify, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Too many witnesses, too many years of documentation. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I sat in the gallery with Candace and Tommy. Rita was there too, and Michael Morrison, and a handful of employees who'd taken the afternoon off to see justice delivered. The courtroom smelled of old wood and floor polish. The clock on the wall ticked through the minutes. When the jury returned, Marcus was already standing at the defense table. His suit was rumpled. His hair needed cutting. The confident director of operations, who'd announced Webb Industries 7 months earlier, was gone. What remained was a man who'd run out of people to manipulate. In the matter of financial exploitation of an elderly person, the foreperson read, "We find the defendant guilty. Guilty on the fraud charges. Guilty on forgery. Guilty on each count, one after another." The word repeated until it lost meaning. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. The judge remanded Marcus to custody pending the hearing. They led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, past the gallery where I sat with his ex-wife and the son he'd traumatized. He didn't look at us, didn't say anything, just walked with his head down, following the deputy through the side door. The sentencing hearing took 2 hours. The prosecutor requested the maximum. Barbara Okonkwo had prepared a victim impact statement I'd written myself, describing 40 years of work and the systematic destruction Marcus had attempted. Michael Morrison presented the civil judgment, the $840,000 Marcus now owed in restitution. The defense attorney asked for leniency. First offense. No prior criminal record. Family circumstances. The usual arguments. The judge listened to both sides. Then she delivered her ruling. "Mr. Webb, you have shown complete lack of remorse throughout these proceedings. You exploited an elderly family member for financial gain. You systematically destroyed a business built over 4 decades. You abused your wife and terrorized your son. You forged documents to steal property where your mother-in-law's ashes were scattered." She paused. The courtroom was silent. "For the charge of financial exploitation of an elderly person, I sentence you to 7 years in state prison. For fraud, 2 years to run concurrent with the first sentence. For forgery, 18 months consecutive." Marcus's shoulders dropped. His attorney put a hand on his arm. "The domestic assault charges will be handled in a separate proceeding, but I'm informed the prosecution will seek an additional 18 months. 8.5 years minimum with the consecutive forgery sentence. Possibly 10 with the assault charges. Parole eligibility after serving 85%. Mr. Webb, you will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $840,000 as determined by the civil judgment. This obligation survives bankruptcy and will be enforced through wage garnishment upon your release." The judge looked at Marcus directly. "You had everything a man could want. A family who loved you. A business that would have provided for you. A community that welcomed you. And you threw it all away for greed and ego. I hope you use your time in custody to reflect on that." She struck her gavel. "Court is adjourned." They led Marcus away again. This time he looked back just once, searching for someone in the gallery. His eyes found Candace. His mouth opened, closed. She didn't look away. Then he was gone through the door, and the deputy closed it behind him. I sat in the gallery for a long moment after everyone else had left. The courtroom emptied around me. The lawyers packed their briefcases. The court reporter stored her equipment. The cleaning crew began setting up for the next session. Marcus Webb entered state prison, owing $840,000 he would never be able to pay. His house was gone. His wine collection had been liquidated for a fraction of what he'd claimed it was worth. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was forfeit. The gambling creditors would be waiting when he got out. $80,000 to the private bookmaker. $45,000 to the casino. Debts that wouldn't go away, that would follow him the rest of his life. The man who had stood at my podium and announced Webb Industries now wore a number. I thought about Helen, about the margin note she'd written 40 years ago. He'll need this someday. She'd known. She'd always known. And she prepared the weapons I needed, stored them in filing cabinets, waited for me to find them. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the way they always did these days. The courtroom was empty now, except for me and the ghosts. "It's done," I said to the empty room. To Helen. To the 40 years of work that had survived everything Marcus tried to do to it. Then I walked out of the courthouse into the February cold, where Candace and Tommy were waiting on a bench by the entrance. "Ready to go home?" I asked. Tommy looked up at me with his grandmother's eyes. "Is it over?" I thought about the company meeting, about Rita crying when I announced the reinstated profit sharing, about the employees who'd stayed loyal through 5 years of erosion, about the sign with the founding date back where it belonged. "Yeah, buddy, it's over." We walked to the truck together. My daughter on one side, my grandson on the other. My story hitting different? Tap like and rate it from 1 to 10. Explain your score below. 18 months after the sentencing. A Saturday evening in September. I sat on the porch of my ranch house, the same porch where Helen and I had watched 1,000 sunsets. The chair creaked under my weight, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, like an old friend saying hello. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower hummed its weekend psalm. Through the screen door, I could hear Tommy in the kitchen, helping Candace with dinner. Plates clinked. Water ran. My daughter laughed at something her son said. The sound stopped me mid-sip. That laugh, unguarded, easy, hadn't filled this house since before Marcus. They'd moved into the guest rooms 18 months ago. The week after the sentencing. Candace still checked the locks twice before bed. Tommy still woke at 3 a.m. sometimes, calling out for someone. But the lock checking was less frequent now. The nightmares were fading. I looked at my hands, resting on my knees. The scar from the Patterson job. The callus from 40 years of wire strippers. These hands had wired 1,000 houses, built a company from nothing. Assembled evidence that put a predator in prison. Now they were teaching my grandson to build ships in bottles. We'd started simple. Wooden boats carved from pine, no bigger than my thumb. Tommy painted them blue and red and green, his tongue poking out in concentration, the way his grandmother's used to when she was working on something important. I'd watch him sand the hulls smooth, stroke after stroke, never speeding up. He'd learned what happened when you rushed. Last month, we graduated to the real thing. The workshop waited in the garage. Lights off now, the day's work done. On the shelf above my workbench, 18 completed ships in bottles caught the evening light through the window. The newest one sat in the center position, the Hum's Victory. I'd started that model the week Helen was diagnosed. Worked on it through her treatment. Through her decline, through the 6 months I spent sleeping in a chair beside her bed, through her death, through the grief that followed, through the discovery of Marcus's betrayal, through the investigation, the confrontation, the trial. 2,400 pieces, 18 months of work, finished 3 weeks ago, on the 2nd anniversary of her death. I sat in the workshop for an hour after placing it on the shelf. The Victory on its shelf, Helen's photograph on the wall. Nothing to say, nothing to do, just the 3 of us. She knew, she always knew. Next to the Victory sat a new bottle, empty for now. A 3-masted schooner waited beside it in pieces, the kit I'd ordered for Tommy. We'd start the rigging next week. His hands were steadier than I'd expected for a 9-year-old. The screen door opened. Tommy came out, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade, walking carefully so they wouldn't spill. He handed me one and sat in the chair beside mine. "Thanks, buddy." "Grandpa, can we work on the boat after dinner? Tomorrow. It's getting dark." He accepted this without argument. A year ago, he would have pushed, would have tested the boundary. Now he understood that some things required waiting. "I've been practicing the knots," he said. "The bowline. Mom helped me. Good. Knots matter. You can't rush them. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the sky turn orange above the roofline. A mockingbird sang somewhere nearby, running through its catalog of stolen songs. Grandpa? Yeah? Is Dad going to stay in prison forever? I looked at my grandson, Helen's eyes, Candace's chin. The question was honest, not loaded with anything except a child's need to understand. Not forever. A long time, though. 8 years, maybe more. Will he be different when he gets out? I thought about Marcus, about the man who'd stood at my podium and announced the end of my career, about the man they'd led away in handcuffs, head down, world collapsed. I don't know, buddy. That's up to him. Tommy nodded. He'd accepted more hard truths in the past year than most children face in a lifetime. It had made him quieter, more watchful, but also stronger. I think I want to be an electrician, he said. Like you. Oh yeah? Yeah. You help people. You fix things that are broken. I took a sip of my lemonade. Let the moment settle. It's hard work. Long hours. Your hands get torn up. I know. He held up his palm, showing me the callus forming at the base of his thumb. From sanding. I looked at that small callus, at the boy who was learning that some things were worth the work. The lake house sat 2 hours north, waiting for our next visit. We went every year on Helen's anniversary, Candace and Tommy and me. We scattered flowers from the dock and watched them drift across the water where her ashes had settled. The property was safe in the family trust, protected by provisions Helen had written years before she knew she'd need them. Sinclair Electric was thriving. The sign out front said, Est. Tine 84 again, the founding date restored where it belonged. 32 employees now. 5 million in annual revenue. The profit-sharing plan fully funded. The Christmas party back at my house. The values I'd built the company on stronger than ever. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. This porch. This boy, learning patience beside me. Grandpa? Yeah, I'm glad we moved here. I put my hand on his shoulder. Felt the small bones, the growing muscle, the future. Me too, buddy. Inside, Candace called us for dinner. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting the way they always did. Tommy jumped up beside me, still young enough that standing was easy. Brace you to the table, he said. You'd win, I know. He grinned, gap-toothed and bright. That's the point. He ran inside. I followed at my own pace. Helen's photograph watched from the mantel as I passed. Her smile, frozen in time. Her eyes, seeing something I was only now beginning to understand. She'd known all along. I sat down at the dinner table, my daughter on one side, my grandson on the other. Candace served meatloaf. The same recipe Helen used to make. Tommy says, you're starting the rigging tomorrow, Candace said. If he's ready. I'm ready, Tommy said through a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Don't talk with your mouth full. He swallowed. I'm ready. I looked at this boy, this 9-year-old who drew his trauma in crayon and handed the evidence to his grandfather without knowing what he'd done. Who was learning to build ships in bottles because his grandfather believed some things were worth waiting for. The Sinclair legacy would continue. Not in buildings or bank accounts. In this. I picked up my fork. Meatloaf. Helen's recipe. The boy across from me had her eyes.